Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about breakout running backs with league-winning upside. Over the course of today's video, I'm going to be talking about 12 running backs who not only have initial value and the potential to break out, but guys that could very easily be the league-winning running back that if you end up having on roster, can help you win a fantasy football championship this year. Now, before I get into talking statistics and justifying the reasons as to why you should be targeting these running backs in your upcoming draft, of course, I want to remind you guys, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. We're making fantasy football content on the daily for the entirety of the 2022 season with the singular goal of helping you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So do yourself a favor, click that button. Thank you very much. Also, for those of you who are trying to get an even bigger advantage upon your league mates outside of the channel itself, you can go ahead and find my 2022 fantasy football draft rankings. In order to find those rankings, go over to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code Andrew today when you make a first-time deposit minimum of $10. When you do so, you'll get a personalized email from me within 24 hours that has my 2022 half and full PPR draft rankings by tier, by position, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, along with my top 200 flex. So this upcoming weekend, if you're looking for my rankings in order to help you out, be sure to sign up. Make a first-time deposit using promo code Andrew via Underdog Fantasy. Link in the description. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the running backs that I wanted to mention. First and foremost, Rams running backs. Again, we have both Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson on the screen because as soon as I introduced the idea of talking about Rams running backs, there's a bit of a division in the audience. Many of you guys have voiced your opinions in regards to whether or not you believe Cam Akers is going to make a pretty decent recovery and return to exactly what he was prior to his Achilles injury, or for those of you who believe that Darrell Henderson is going to be the back that dominates in 2022. So let's talk about them both. First and foremost, let's talk about Cam Akers because he's coming off the board first between these two running backs in our 2022 fantasy football draft. Now, again, many of us remember Cam Akers in 2020, between weeks 13 through the playoffs, this guy was averaging 23.83 touches per game and 15.72 fantasy points per game, while also playing 72% of the offensive snaps. Now, that was a pretty promising finish to his rookie year, but then you go into his sophomore year, unfortunately, deals with that Achilles injury, and then we get the aftermath of that, whether it was Sony Michel, Darrell Henderson performing very well for the Rams, and then also Cam Akers not having a great playoff performance throughout the 4 contests that they played against Arizona, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, and Cincinnati. But again, he was only a couple months removed from that torn Achilles, but they continue to give him the ball. And the reason why they continue to do so, regardless of the fact that they had Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel both on rosters, because they trust Cam Akers. And that action by Sean McVay and this coaching staff gives me hope that they trust him and they want to give him the ball regardless of what kind of situation they are in. And going into the 2022 season, I expect to see a very similar outcome in which they trust Cam Akers, and if he's available and active and performing, they're going to go ahead and give him the ball at an extended rate, similar to the way that he was given in his rookie year. Perhaps it may not be at that extent of where he's touching the ball 24 times per game, because you can go ahead and give 6 of those touches to Darrell Henderson, keep your primary back healthy. Even with that, there is a lot of value to be had because we all know how much inherent value this backfield holds, even back in the days of Todd Gurley transition to CJ Anderson, then to, of course, Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers, Sony Michel. Now, what exactly did these other running backs end up producing in his absence? Of course, we saw Darrell Henderson from weeks 1 through 12 of the 2021 season be the number 12 overall fantasy running back, averaging 14.35 fantasy points per game. There is inherent value in this backfield because it is associated with a top tier offense. And as long as you have opportunities to score, the fantasy points are going to be there regardless of how many targets these respective running backs are going to have, which over the last couple years hasn't been very high, but the touchdowns certainly have. And those opportunities are going to continue to come this year. Last year, the combination of Sony Michel and Darrell Henderson accumulated 69 red zone rushing attempts for 9 rushing touchdowns. 13 of those inside the 5-yard line for 7 rushing touchdowns. If you can go ahead and insert that into a Cam Akers overall scoreline, of course, that's where his value is going to be made. But for those of you who believe that Darrell Henderson is going to be the player that you want to invest in, a guy that you can get way farther down the draft board, and you believe he is going to step in and be an absolute fantastic running back because Cam Akers may not be able to overcome this Achilles injury, then, go ahead and invest as such, because I truly do believe Darrell Henderson does have that ability to have a breakout season when given opportunity. He's already proven it, not only last year, where he was the number 12 running back between weeks 1 through 12, averaging over 14 fantasy points, but even the year prior in 2020, when Malcolm Brown went down with an injury, and even Cam Akers, his rookie year, went down with a rib cartilage injury. Darrell Henderson stepped up weeks 2 through 7, was averaging 13.32 fantasy points per game, and very similar numbers in terms of total opportunity per game. I think Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers, if you're able to get both on the same roster, you're in a perfect position. But if you're willing to invest in one of the two, I think they certainly have inherent value based on the association with the Rams offense. Moving on, let's talk about Chase Edmonds and the Miami Dolphins backfield. You know, it's been a while since we've had a secure Miami running back that we can certainly trust in on a weekly basis. But Chase Edmonds is going to finally present that to us, whether it is in a half or full PPR scoring format at a pretty extended rate based on how much of an ability he has as a receiving threat. Again, in his tenure with the Arizona Cardinals, 2019 through 2021, he had 21 games of 3 or more receptions, some games in which he had 8 catches on 9 targets. Again, he is a pure receiving option, and we even saw him with the Arizona Cardinals line up out wide or in the slot nearly 30% of the time over the last 3 seasons. So as long as they continue to utilize him out wide, I don't really mind that he's going to have a Raheem Mostert in his back pocket, potentially breathing down his neck. Now, yes, Raheem Mostert has a comfortability within this offense, but ultimately, we know what Raheem Mostert has been over the last couple years. He's an incredibly talented running back that has deadly speed, has averaged 14.65 fantasy points per game in the games he's been given 10 or more opportunities or touches, doesn't matter. He's had 19 of those games between 2019 and 2020, but the primary issue with Raheem Mostert is that he hasn't been on the field much as of late. In 2020, had an MCL sprain, also followed by an ankle sprain, then returned, also had another ankle sprain. His entire season completely melted away. Then in 2021, we all thought this offense is only ascending. He's going to be a perfect play. Immediately gets a meniscus injury, done for the season. That knee injury just pretty much dislodged, put him on the injured reserve, and it was over. Now, obviously, he's going to come into this offense with the new head coach, Mike McDaniels. They already have a prior relationship, but I don't really believe Raheem Mostert can be that 3-down back. He certainly can get himself 1 out of those 3 downs, but if you go ahead and give him the ball far too often, his body is going to break down. He's been in the league for quite some time now, and we all know time is undefeated. So as of right now, I'm looking towards Chase Edmonds, a guy that could very easily be a breakout candidate this year. Based on what he was able to do with Arizona, anytime he was given 8 or more touches, he was averaging 12.49 fantasy points per game with the Arizona Cardinals. Anytime he was given 12 or more touches, 15.35 fantasy points per game. In the 4 contests where he was the lone back of this team, not only did he play 90% of the offensive snaps, but he was averaging 19.43 fantasy points per game. When you have the easiest strength of schedule at the running back position, you have Mike McDaniel, who is bringing in a brand new scheme behind a brand new regenerated offensive line. You bring in Teron Armstead as the left tackle, Connor Williams as the left guard. I mean, Tyreek Hill is going to stretch defenses, force them to not be able to stack the box. We know Tua wants to go ahead and check down the ball. His average depth of target was not very high last season, and there's a reason why. We saw a player like Myles Gaskin able to accumulate 40 receptions last year. I think Chase Edmonds is in a perfect position to have a breakout season within an offense that, again, a lot of people aren't really thinking much of. They know that the Dolphins have weapons. They just don't know how they're going to be used. And I can certainly say that Chase Edmonds is going to be utilized at a maximum capacity and have that breakout ability that will potentially get him into the RB2 conversation, but at very worst on your roster as a flex player. Moving on, let's talk about A.J. Dillon. I talked about Aaron Jones yesterday as one of the players that I really like drafting this year, but I also like drafting A.J. Dillon. Any association with an offense as such, especially considering they're going to have to lean upon the running game that much more this year, gives me confidence. Now, in terms of what A.J. Dillon has done in the last 2 seasons, anytime he's been given 10 or more rushing attempts, he's averaged over 14 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format, having done that 10 times in the last 2 seasons. Now, in the 7 games in which A.J. Dillon has played 45% or more of the offensive snaps, he's averaged 16.71 fantasy points per game. Again, you give this man opportunity in association with a top-tier offense, of course, success is going to be found, and we've talked about the metrics. When Davante Adams has left the game early or not been in the game at all due to injury in the last 3 seasons, Green Bay Packers running backs have averaged 38.33 fantasy points per game. Those running backs were also responsible for 86 total targets. As soon as you don't have Davante Adams and Marquez Valdes-Scantling in the lineup, Aaron Rodgers is going to look for comfort, checkdowns. And that's what he's done with Aaron Jones, and he'll continue to do with A.J. Dillon. Again, A.J. Dillon last season, 37 targets, 34 receptions, 313 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He is a capable receiving option. Not as good as, Aaron Jones within that own respective offense, but good enough to get the job done, to say the very least. Again, last season, he was the number 30th overall running back in terms of overall receptions, and I don't think that number is going to stay stagnant. I think it may even go up this season. Now, when you talk about having 2 running backs within the top 24 of our fantasy rankings, is it even possible? Yes, it is. We have seen it over the course of the last 5 seasons that 8 of the 9 teams who were able to get 2 of their running backs in the top 24 of the fantasy half PPR rankings were top 10 in running back opportunity in their given years. Now, one of those teams last season was the Green Bay Packers. They were the 10th in that category, 497 total opportunities for their running backs, along with Denver, who was 9th in that category, which had 2 top 24 running backs. And in seasons prior, we've seen Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, we've seen Nyheim Hines, Jonathan Taylor, we've seen J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson. We've seen multiple running backs be able to accomplish this in seasons past, and I certainly think Green Bay will be able to do so once again. And again, don't forget, if Aaron Jones at any point goes down with an injury, obviously we're not hoping that's going to be the case in any capacity, but if it does happen, you have the keys to the kingdom for a top 5 potential running back prospect here in A.J. Dillon. Moving on, let's talk about a budget A.J. Dillon. That's Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, going into the 2022 year, I expect Dameon Pierce to still be an active part of this lineup. Again, last season, he still only played 41.12% of the offensive snaps between weeks 6 through 18, yet he was the number 7 overall back with a 16.2 fantasy point per game average. Dameon Pierce is going to continue to be a part of this offense. I fully expect that. So you may be wondering, where does that exactly present the league-winning upside from Rhamondre Stevenson? Well, again, if in fact we do see, similar to A.J. Dillon's scenario, the starting running back of an offense go down, Rhamondre Stevenson would immediately step up in Dameon Pierce's place. And like we saw last year in the 2 games that Dameon Pierce missed, Rhamondre Stevenson came in and put up 20 fantasy points easy. And he'll continue to do that because this offense is pretty much formulated to do so. They got a great offensive line and they want to continue to run the ball. There's a reason why the New England Patriots have been number 1 amongst all teams in the National Football League since 2017 in terms of total running back opportunities and number 4 in terms of total running back rushing attempts. As a whole, this team wants to go ahead, run the ball, and play defense. And that's exactly what they're going to do. Now, when you have James White retiring and Brandon Bolden going to the Las Vegas Raiders, we have a plethora of receptions available at the running back position. And what we've heard out of camp is that Rhamondre Stevenson is going to play that James White role. Now, whether or not he is at the same, level, probably not, to say the very least. But he's still going to get a lot of value from said receptions, because when I've looked at the last 3 years of the National Football League, there have been 36 running backs who have accumulated 150 total rushing attempts and 40 receptions in a season. Now, if we go ahead and see Rhamondre Stevenson's rushing attempts jump by 30 this year, you'll get into that 150 range. And if he goes ahead and absorbs what Brandon Bolden did last year, Brandon Bolden had 49 targets and 41 receptions. You'll go ahead and get on that track. But of those 36 running backs in the last 3 seasons, 34 of them put up a minimum of 159 fantasy points. The only 2 that weren't capable of doing so was Barkley and Gaskin last year, who were hyper inefficient in terms of their receiving work. Now, if you go ahead and take 159 fantasy points in a half PPR and look at what kind of value that is of the last 3 years. In 2019, that was the number 23 back. In 2020, that was the number 21 overall back. And in 2021, that would have made him the number 24 overall back. Again, a lot of value to be had here for Rhamondre Stevenson in an offense that is certainly going to get him involved. Moving on, let's talk about Tony Pollard. Again, even though I am someone who believes that Zeke is going to have potential to continue to be as good as he has been in the past, I'm still of the opinion that Tony Pollard is the more talented back and should be getting more touches. But I don't think that's the current situation here. I expect this team to run Zeke into the ground, and until they do so, where the wheels completely fall out, Tony Pollard is just going to be a potential handcuff with flex upside that may end up being a little bit more than that this year. Now, we've heard this offseason on multiple occasions from the offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore. He said that they were going to use Tony Pollard at an extended rate this year, get him more touches, especially in the receiving game. Now, if you go ahead and you look at what Pollard was able to do in college, in his 3 years, 104 receptions, 1,292 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. Certainly a capable receiving option, yet last season, he only played 1.1 third down snaps per game. Now, obviously, Ezekiel Elliott, 47 receptions each of the last 4 years, is beginning to take that value from Tony Pollard. But if they go ahead and they move Tony Pollard into the slot position, like I have seen them do at training camp, this is going to elevate his overall potential. A running back that already last season was number 2 amongst all at the position with a minimum of 100 rushing attempts with a 5.5 yard per carry average. A running back that had the 5th most yards after contact per attempt, 3.61. Again, a lot of potential for this back, a player that last season, when he was given 10 or more opportunities in a game, was averaging 11.35 fantasy points per game. I truly do believe this offense is going to continue to run the ball. They have been at the top 12 at the running back opportunity category and rushing attempt category over the last 3 years with Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator. And as long as Zeke is looking in the direction of slowing down in any regard, Pollard is going to get more touches. I will 100% believe that. And if it gets to a point where Zeke truly slows down to the point where a replacement happens, this is the keys to the kingdom. This is literally the lottery ticket that could win you the league. That's Tony Pollard for you. All right, moving on. Let's talk about Elijah Mitchell, another one of these potential breakout backs. In the 11 games that Elijah Mitchell played for the 49ers last year, he averaged 20.55 touches per game and 14.14 fantasy points per game. Now, in the short time that we saw Elijah Mitchell work last year, he, of course, was carrying our fantasy teams. In fact, he was on a pace of being the number 5 overall back if he had played a full 17-game season. Now, obviously, injuries riddled him, and that obviously slowed him down. And even once he came back, Deebo Samuel was more involved in the running game. And that's wherein lies the question as to what the potential is for Elijah Mitchell. We know they want to give him opportunity. He continued to see a lot of opportunity into the playoffs. In fact, last season, if you combine his regular season and playoff stats, he had 14 games of over 50 total yards, 10 games of over 75 total yards, and 5 games of over 100 total yards. They want to get him involved, and that's exactly what they're going to do, especially if, in fact, Deebo Samuel takes a little bit of a step back in terms of how many total rushing attempts and how featured he is in the running role. Again, don't forget the main reason why they implemented him into the backfield is because Elijah Mitchell went down with that injury, and they didn't want to hand the ball off to Trey Sermon, who they've now recently cut from their team. Nonetheless, if we get a healthy Elijah Mitchell, we have elite level opportunity behind a run-first team that over the course of the last 5 years with Kyle Shanahan has been one of the best running teams in the National Football League. And if you're in fact going ahead and having a running quarterback, it does bring down the potential upside of how many rushing attempts Elijah Mitchell can have in a game and how much work he'll get in the receiving game, considering mobile quarterbacks are far more inclined to scramble for yards rather than dump it off to their running backs. We've seen that year over year in the National Football League. But the one thing that I saw this year that gives me a little bit of hope is that Anthony Lynn was hired as an assistant offensive coordinator this offseason by the 49ers. For those of you who remember, Anthony Lynn last year was the offensive coordinator for the Lions. And throughout the first 12 weeks of the season, he was the play caller. Prior to then, after that, Dan Campbell took over. But while he was the play caller, you guys saw how many targets Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift accumulated. And then prior to his offensive coordinator job with the Lions, 2017 through 2020, he was the head coach of the Chargers. Y'all saw how many opportunities Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler accumulated there. We're talking about an offensive coordinator assistant at this current capacity who is going to implement a little bit more of a receiving game in this offense. And though coexisting with a mobile quarterback is going to be difficult, if in fact the receiving game does come into play and Elijah Mitchell is getting all those goal line attempts and is scoring consistent touchdowns, my goodness, he could very easily get into that top 12 conversation because that's exactly where he was last year prior to his injuries. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the next running back on today's list. We have Travis Etienne. Again, it's not really a surprise as to why we're talking about him. We've seen what he's been able to do in college at Clemson. He's going ahead and already has the familiarity with Trevor Lawrence in this offense. They're going to have that rapport, especially in the receiving game, considering Travis Etienne in the final 2 years at Clemson, 85 catches, 1,020 receiving yards. That is already built in. Now, in the past, we have seen Jacksonville Jaguars running backs find success. That is a given. I don't care how bad your team is in the actual NFL. Fantasy is a completely different conversation, whether it's Fournette in 2019, whether it's James Robinson in 2020 as the number 7 overall running back, averaging over 16 fantasy points per game that year. Now, even last year, James Robinson, prior to his first injury that he sustained in week 7 against the Seattle Seahawks, he was the number 7 overall running back, once again, averaging over 16 fantasy points per game. But then he got hurt against the Seattle Seahawks, kind of slowed down as the season progressed, then tore his Achilles. And that brings in the conversation. Can we expect to see James Robinson, after just a couple months of recovery, get into this offense and take away value from a rookie? I mean, I call him a rookie because he didn't play last year. A rookie running back that has so much potential upside, not only on the ground, but through the air. Again, the main difference between a Cam Akers and James Robinson is the amount of recovery time in between the two. I mean, we're talking about a 6 months gap between the two. That's what gives Cam Akers that advantage. Now, ultimately, when you think of Travis Etienne, we're thinking a player that we could very easily get at the back end of the third, beginning of the 4th round. Perfect enough value that if in fact he does step up into the starting role of this offense with Doug Peterson as the new head coach. I mean, we've seen Peterson allow Miles Sanders to be the number 23 overall back in 2020 and the number 15 overall back in 2019. There has been so much potential for running backs in Philadelphia in seasons past when Doug Peterson was there. In fact, he was giving his running backs from 2016 through 2020 a total of 101 targets and 363 rushing attempts per year. A lot of opportunity is available, and I absolutely believe that Travis Etienne can step in and deliver on said opportunity. Now, if you go ahead and look at the past decade of football and the first round running backs that were selected, there were 15 of them. 14 of them played their season. The only one that didn't, Travis Etienne. But if you go ahead and think about the 14 remaining running backs there, 8 of those running backs finished as RB1s, and 12 of those total running backs had 220 plus touches in their rookie season. There's a very good chance that Travis Etienne gets himself 220 to 240 total touches this year, makes himself an RB2. But if in fact the touchdowns are there and James Robinson isn't, we're talking about top 12 running back upside, league winning potential to say the very least. Moving on. Let's talk about Dameon Pierce. All right, let's talk about other rookie running backs. Now, this is the third time I'm talking about Dameon Pierce this offseason. I had a video a couple of weeks ago in regards to players that you must draft in your upcoming, fantasy leagues. Now, at the time, I did not know whether or not he was going to be the immediate starting running back. I expected him to compete with Rex Burkhead and Marlon Mack at the beginning of the season, but eventually win the job. That's why we were targeting him at the value he was at. But now, most recently, we have seen that they've cut Marlon Mack, then re-signed Marlon Mack as a practice squad running back, and that Dameon Pierce is the starting running back of this team. Going into 2022, we're talking about a rookie running back that has the potential that a lot of these other rookies aren't going to have. They're going to continue to give him the ball, whether it's on early downs or on third downs, that is going to present a lot of value for us. Now, with that all said, one of the most important parts of this entire equation is who he's running behind. Last season, this was the worst run blocking offense in the National Football League. 32nd in yards before contact per carry, 0.7 yards. 24th in yards after contact per rush. Again, the running backs weren't even performing very well. They were 31st in total running back rushing yards, 1,193. They were 20th in running back rushing attempts, 348. And they were 24th in running back opportunity, 451. But those numbers, I'm looking at them and thinking, man, that's enough opportunity for Dameon Pierce. Purely. If he's to get 200 rushing attempts and 50, overall targets, it is going to make him a valuable prospect, potentially top 24, in the same vein that I was talking about Rhamondre Stevenson earlier. So if we're in a scenario where we're getting a running back with this much opportunity, of course we want to go ahead and draft him because he has the potential of being a breakout candidate. Now, though he wasn't given much opportunity at Florida, it does not mean he's not going to find immediate success. We've seen other running backs like Antonio Gibson, who had only literally 77 rushing attempts in his college career, but they came in and for the Washington football team, back-to-back years of a top 12 standing. Washington Commanders, but nonetheless, I'm getting used to that. And then we go ahead and we talk about Alvin Kamara, who in his final 2 years at Tennessee was getting about 140 touches per season. If we're going to talk about running backs who, are sitting in that 120 range coming into the NFL, in my opinion, that just means that there's less miles on his body and that those hits that he's going to take, aren't going to wear down on him as much as other running backs who are coming out of college with 300, 700 rushing attempts in their entire careers. That all being said, when we go into the 2022 season, we have the passing game coordinator and QB coach becoming the offensive coordinator, Pep Hamilton. Last year, in the 11 games that Davis Mills played, the running backs for this team averaged 21 rushing attempts per game and 6.55 targets per game, 14.71 fantasy points per game. Like I mentioned, a lot of opportunity to be had. I like Dameon Pierce this season. Moving on. Let's talk about Seahawks running backs because we know there's a lot of potential in this backfield. Again, we saw Rashaad Penny carry our fantasy teams late last season. For those of us who were blessed with Rashaad Penny's contributions, he was averaging 21.54 fantasy points per game between weeks 14 through 18 of the 2021 year, and of course, helped us capture championships. Last year was number one amongst all running backs with a 6.3 yard per carry average, when was also number one amongst all running backs with an average of 4.52 yards per carry after contact. An incredible overall performance, but the issue with Rashaad Penny is that, man, he's only ever played 8 games in his first 4 seasons in which he was given 12 or more opportunities. He has very rarely been healthy enough to be a vital part of this offense and quickly integrated. With Chris Carson being the primary back over the last couple of years, Rashaad Penny getting injured often, hamstrings, ACLs, sprained ankles, knee problems, everything has, pretty much hit Rashaad Penny. But yet, through all that adversity, he showed up last season and was able to take over this backfield, which ensured that he was going to come back for a 5th year here with the Seahawks, potentially win a job for the future. Now, with that all said, there is the contention of Kenneth Walker, a second-round running back that had an incredible year last season at Michigan State, was number 1 in multiple categories in the NCAA. He was number 1 in yards after contact last season and number 1 in missed tackles forced amongst all running backs. Those kind of numbers lead us in the direction of potentially expecting Kenneth Walker to be the starter for this team. But as of right now, with the hernia injury, Kenneth Walker is probably going to be sidelined for a little while. That does give Rashaad Penny the first crack at it, and I expected him to get the first crack at it. But what this presents to us is the ability to get both these players at pretty solid value. Rashaad Penny is not going to have a high ADP because everyone knows what you're going to get. You're going to get a player that is going to play well, but if he does not stay healthy, the entire investment is over. And if you go ahead and invest in a later player like Kenneth Walker, you're getting the discount because of his current status, on top of the fact that he has overall upside later. If you're able to combine both these running backs on a singular roster, similar to the way that we were talking about with the Rams, we could find a lot of success here within an offense that has completely redone their offensive line. They brought in 3 new starters this offseason, which is only going to help the running game, which they're certainly going to have to rely upon without Russell Wilson there. I really do believe a Seattle Seahawks running back is going to have value this season. As to who, that's a matter of who stays healthy. That question in itself, that's up in the air. So let's go ahead, try to invest in both, and get the lottery ticket that ends up hitting this season as a league-winning back. Moving on, let's talk about our final running back, Breece Hall. The only other rookie that I wanted to mention. Breece Hall is associated with an offense that already has a starter from last year, Michael Carter. Michael Carter was an RB3. Now, though Michael Carter had himself a pretty decent year, and though he is getting first-team snaps, I expect the talent of Breece Hall to eventually overtake him. When we've looked at second-round running backs in the NFL draft and their success rates over the last 5 years, since 2017, there have been 17 running backs selected in the first 50 picks of their respective NFL drafts. Of those running backs selected in the first 50 picks, 14 of those 17 guys played full healthy years. Of course, we've seen Ronald Jones in the past, Dalvin Cook in the past. They missed time due to their injuries. Now, of those 14 remaining backs, 5 of them were RB1s, 5 of them were RB2s, and 3 were RB3s. So 13 of those 14 backs, top 36 standing. And you mean to tell me that there's a potential where Michael Carter, a guy that couldn't even have the full share of his backfield last season and was getting, guys like Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman opportunities in this backfield, you tell me he is going to be able to stop the Iowa State running back, Breece Hall? I doubt it. And that's why I'm drafting Breece Hall this offseason, because I know he has 3-down potential. He can be a workhorse back behind a pretty solid offensive line. This is a player that, in his final years at college, 82 receptions, 700 plus receiving yards. He is a capable 3-down back. And in an offense that wants to go ahead and run the ball because their offensive coordinator is a former, Kyle Shanahan disciple, they want to run the ball. If they get to do so, they're certainly going to do it with Breece Hall. And it's only a matter of time until he takes over this offense purely. Now, I know in comparison to other early round running backs that are selected to different teams, like Najee Harris last year, he went to the Steelers. Nobody was impeding his overall opportunity, and he immediately found success. And he's a part of a better organization. When we think about Jets running backs, we think about Frank Gore, Matt Forte, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Chris Johnson. Those are the best running backs that have played here in the last decade plus, and all of those running backs have come to the Jets to see their careers end. Hopefully, this is going to be a beginning of a young man's career that completely just skyrockets and helps us win championships this year. I'm hoping that Breece Hall can maintain that job, dominate in the running game, and be a vital part of this Jets offense. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. Those are our breakout league-winning running backs for the 2022 fantasy football season. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. Of course, check out Underdog Fantasy. For those of you who are trying to draft teams, gain some experience before your upcoming drafts this weekend, get my 2022 fantasy football draft rankings for a half and full PPR scoring format. All you got to do is make a first-time deposit minimum of $10 using promo code Andrew today. You will get an email from me within 24 hours. So if, in fact, you're seeing this video now, if you were to sign up today, you would get that email tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m. on time. Updated rankings as of tomorrow to set you up for success for your upcoming drafts this weekend. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate you guys supporting the channel. And until next time tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.